to all sorts of people and communities that I care about, but it's not that far away from the type of bill that Mitt Romney would have passed if he were elected president in 2012 and would have been like one of his top priorities in 2013 or 14. I think the norm breaking that's coming from the administration is extreme in a lot of areas on immigration, the use of executive power, but the reconciliation bill, again, I think is horrible, and I don't think I would vote against it if I was in the U.S. Senator in Congress, but I think is much closer to where the Republican Party has been on legislative matters and tax cuts and clawing back the welfare state for the past 30 years. It needs to be much closer to a sort of normie Republican policy bill than some of the other stuff the administration is doing. So that's just a piece of context to right. It's not defending the bill, but I do think it's an interesting contrast that the administration is doing all these things out in left field through executive power, but what they're doing legislatively, tracks pretty closely with what a Tea Party type presidency would have looked like even 10 or 15 years ago. Okay.
Let's move on a little then to taking a look at 2026. What are some of your thoughts with regard to the Democratic strategy and Governor Walz? I think the word he used, was the Democrats could be roadkill in this next election unless. So thoughts on the House, the Senate, whatever else you think are going to be important factors in these upcoming elections?
Yeah, 2026 is going to be a referendum on the first 2 years of the administration and not a referendum on the Democratic Party. And I gains, how significant those gains are, I think are yet to be seen. But, we've already seen the approval rating on the economy. Crater to so our identity as having both fightful innovations and some strategic innovations about what we're saying when we reach them, but I actually those innovations needed for us to do well in 2026. Obviously, if we can figure out some breakthrough on the tactical and strategic front, it would help us have larger gains. But the 2026 midterm will be a referendum on the Trump administration, and all the Democrats really need to do is to be the party of opposition and present something that we can talk about. Obviously, very difficult map for Democrats. I think chances of us taking back the Senate majority are very low, and will require some innovative approaches like stuff I was working on last year in Nebraska when Dan Osborne ran as an independent and challenged an incumbent Republican senator and overperformed by 14 points. I think we need not necessarily independents, but candidates of that ilk who can run competitive races in redder states, whether that's Iowa, Nebraska, Alaska, South Carolina, places where Democrats may be able to run well-funded campaigns and get within 5 or 6 points, but getting over the hump is really difficult. difficult, and so we need to look at what are the alternative types of candidates we can run to try to defeat Republicans in those places.
So your candidate in Nebraska, I think, in the last term, was an independent. Do you think he's going to run again against the other senator, or where is that?
Yeah, he's launched an exploratory committee to run against Pete Ricketts. The Ricketts family owns TD Ameritrade and the Chicago Cubs, some other things. So there's a lot of contrasts sort of built in there. You know, we're trying to make the argument that the working class needs a seat at the table, and that, you know, Washington shouldn't be all controlled by billionaires, and, you know, so running against a billionaire who owns professional sports teams and plays around with his daddy's money is sort of a nice contrast for that race. So yeah, Dan's exploring whether or not to run, and I think we'll, you know, make a decision in the next couple of months here.
And is that a strategy that you think, you said not necessarily independents, but what about, for example, here in New Hampshire? We've got an interesting situation where Senator Shaheen is stepping down, and Representative Pappas apparently is going to run for that seat. The Republicans have a number of people who quote unquote could be interested. Scott Brown famously, and of course our old friend Corey Lewandowski, and, you know, perhaps some others. Is there a chance we could, you know, what do you think about that seat? I mean, that's one that it seems to me, you know, may not be as safe as if Gene were running for re-election.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's hard for me to see in a sort of national political environment like 2026, Democrats not winning a Senate seat, I'm sure, especially with sort of Norway Democrat like Pappas as the nominee, which I think he will be. So I feel very good about Pappas. Obviously, if like Scott Brown gets in, that's a whole different thing. I think Pappas beats Lewandowski very easily.
Yeah.
So a lot depends on what goes on in the Republican primary, but I feel pretty good about Pappas winning that seat.
So do you think do you have any thought about Maggie Goodlander running in a primary against Pappas?
She's ruled it out. There was some, you know, back and just thinking about it a couple of months ago when she came to Richard. And I worked with and against Maggie in the state. But yeah, she's ruled it out and she's endorsed Pappas. So this is, you know, basically looking for the Democratic nomination for that Senate seat.
Okay. I hadn't heard that. What other Senate seats or 2026? What's your thought about California and the possibility of Kamala Harris running for governor? What have you heard?
I haven't heard. I don't do a ton of California work, so that's, you know, California is kind of its own little game out there. They have their own cohort of consultants, and, you know, they're just the biggest economy in the world. It makes sense that they would have their own sort of set of people who work on stuff out there. So I don't do a ton of California work. I'm not that plugged in out there. We'll see what happens. I know she didn't show up to the state convention in Anaheim last weekend, which raised some eyebrows. I think cast some doubt on the idea that she would run for governor. But we'll see. In terms of the other Senate races, And it's helpful to like look at the map and like what are the marginal seats we need to win as Democrats in order to take back Senate control. So the majority right now is 53-47, 53 Republicans, 47 Democrats. That includes Angus King, independent caucusing with the Democrats. Our two big opportunities are in North Carolina and Maine, though we don't have a super strong candidate in Maine yet. So if any of you have friends that can raise $150 million over the next 15 months and want to run against Susan Collins, let me know. Would love to know who they are. So if we win North Carolina and Maine, we get to 51-49, and we've got to win 2 more seats in order to take back the majority, because the Republicans in a tie scenario, 50-50, obviously have the vice president and be able to break the tie and control the chamber. So win 2 more seats, and the places to look are states like Iowa. I'm sure a lot of folks in there have seen Joni Ernst making a name for herself. She's the Republican senator who's up for re-election in Iowa. She said on Friday at a town hall that don't worry too much about the Medicaid cuts because we're all going to die anyway, which seems like a winning message, obviously. But I think looking at states like so Iowa is Jimmy Ernst in 2021 by 6 points, so 6 percentage points. So that's like in the realm of possibility type of race we could win. I think it requires running a candidate who can bring some of the working class and rural voters the Democrats have lost over the past decade back into the fold. That primary is shaping up to be very interesting. I had full disclosure, have a candidate there. His name's Nathan Sage. He's deployed to Iraq 3 times. He grew up in a trailer park, and he's a sports radio commentator and a mechanic. He's never run for office before, but runs his local chamber of commerce in Knoxville, Iowa. Town people helps the few there. I think that's that is the profile of candidate we should be running if we're trying to bring rural and class voters back into the competitive in states. In the race yet, likely to the Senate Minority Leader out there in the state Senate is Matt Walz, who is great. I love Zach. He grew up in Des Moines. He went to Princeton and then Harvard. And he's the son of a wealthy doctor. I don't think that is the right profile of a candidate. He spent 20 years in elected office. I don't think that's the right profile of candidate to run competitive statewide elections in places like Iowa. So the Democratic Party in these primaries in states like Iowa, Nebraska, Alaska have a lot of choices to make about the profile candidate we're running, and I think primary voters should be thinking long and hard about not just the candidate they like the best, but the candidate that can win over independents and some Republicans and drive up turnout among working class Democrats showing up or have become entranced with the whole MAGA thing. So yeah.
So one of the things that's become, I think, apparent to all of us is the incredible amount of money that's necessary to wage a statewide campaign for governor or for senator today. You mentioned, you threw out a figure in Maine, which has no people and a lot of moose of $150 million. So, I mean, whatever the number is, these are telephone numbers. So how do you raise big money for candidates who atypical profiles? Do you think it will be available? Money, I mean?
Yeah, I do. Look, these races get particularly, the Senate races get very nationalized, right? Everyone, in Maine, when Sarah Gideon ran against Susan Collins last time in 2020. She raised, I don't know the exact figure, but I'm sure it's 95 to 98% of the money that she raised,
Right.
a total of $100 million, came from outside of the
Right.
state of Maine.
Yeah.
And that's because you have party committees like the Democratic Central Campaign Committee that are helpful in the fundraising fund, connect Sarah to big donors on the coasts and all over the country. And then, you know, small dollar grass donors, all the people that and things like that. You know, people because grassroots donors, stakes of the U.S. Senate race in Maine, and you know, I donate $10 or $50 or $500 to that race, and the pool of people who will chip in somewhere in the ball race with high stakes, like the Senate majority, but there's a lot of money that can be raised from national. We call them big dollar donors. That's like the people that can cut a $100,000 check.
Yeah.
Super PAC.
Right.
And then there's small dollar donors. Those are the people that they send you back 25%.
Right.
To go beat Susan Collins.
Well, we all, I think, get plenty of those. So let me stop and ask if any of you have any questions. If anybody online has any questions. So, yeah, Sugar?
About Georgia.
Question, what about Georgia?
Well, I mean, and so much matters about who the Republican nominee is there.
Yeah.
John's going to be able to raise the political. I have a prayer of winning in Georgia in 2026. The political argument is that he does have a prayer, and Trump's done a pretty good job of developing a brand in the state of Georgia that is in just about being like a progressive liberal senator. He's used his 6 years in the Senate to build a lot of accomplishments that I think in that race in American history. And I think John pulls it out, but it really depends on the Republican nominations.
Yes, Martha.
What about Heather Cox Richardson to run against Collins?
Did you hear that? Heather Cox Richardson running against Susan Collins?
That'd be great.
She could raise.
I don't know, like the people want Janet Mills to run, and she hasn't ruled it out. She's been thinking about it. That would be the big get for national Democrats if they can recruit Mills to run against Collins. To me, if that is actually in play, but currently the only Democrat in that race is this guy named Jordan Wood, who's a former congressional staffer and candidate, in my opinion, not a very serious candidate. So
Was there any conversation about Jared Golden taking a shot at that race or no?
There definitely was. Jared, I think, was looking more closely at the governor's race.
I see.
Because Janet Mills is struggling with it. That's a very interesting governor's race. Troy Jackson, Angus King's son, Angus King III is in that race. A few others. But Jared, LePage is running against Jared in that Maine 2nd congressional district. So Jared decided to stay in Congress and defend that seat.
Yes, Carol.
The bill just passed in the House that's going to the U.S. Senate.
Yes.
It's my understanding there are some Republicans who may support that. or may vote against it, excuse me. What
So-
are his thoughts?
So the comment is on the bill, that is the big, really bad bill that is in the Senate now, that there are some Republicans in the Senate who have spoken up against it. Any comment on if that will have any impact on, you've said earlier that you thought the bill would pass.
Yeah, I think it'll pass, and it doesn't mean it won't get, the Senate has the opportunity to make all sorts of changes to the bill. I think that the Senate will moderate the bill slightly. I think some of the details of the Medicaid work requirements and cuts will change and probably become less stringent, less restrictive, which is a good thing, but the bill passing is not a good thing. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the point being made is like Josh Hawley and Republican Josh Hawley understands that the Republican Party, or at least the Republican Party that he is trying to build, is a working class party, and that party, Republicans now win majorities of voters that are on programs like Medicaid, and that making deep cuts to those programs are politically unpopular across the board. They're actually politically unpopular with the current base of the is right about that, and to the degree he can push back on Medicaid cuts, I think that's a good thing. So.
Anything from Bob? You have a question?
Yes, the United States has plenty of problems, and Donald Trump was elected to solve those problems, but he's doing a rather poor job of it. And we're listening to the Democrat strategy, which is to get elected, and we're listening to a discussion of tactics. My question is, what is the Democrat strategy to solve the problems that Trump was elected to solve?
So there's a 20-second feedback. So a nice softball.
What's the Democratic Party's strategy to solve all the problems?
Right, of the world. How much time do we have?
The nice thing about losing elections is you get to have really rigorous arguments about these things and don't have to follow the orthodoxy of a party leader or a president. The Democratic Party currently has no leader. So there's a lot of space for discussion and dialogue about what that strategy should be. There obviously isn't one at the moment, certainly not one anyone agrees on. But there's a lot of, I think one of the things that's gained steam early in the Trump administration is this idea of an abundance approach to how we govern. This is like Ezra Klein has a book that came out a couple of months ago called Abundance, which sort of lays out this political vision of a Democratic Party that isn't a thing. You see people like Wes Moore at the South Carolina
Fish fry
that happened this past weekend that I know Maynard mentioned in the email about this event, talking about how the Democratic Party has for too long been the party of no and will study it, and it needs to become the party of yes and now. So rebuilding ourselves as a party that is basically anti-regulation and sort of like fast-track building and development, and is much more focused on the delivery of core goods and services like housing and healthcare than we are about the process of how those services get delivered, which we've been obsessed with for the past 4 years.
So following up on that, Jess, what about the Democratic National Committee? As someone who doesn't really follow those things, I have not been particularly impressed with the people who were elected to that committee. Are they going to be helpful is there, we know there are, senatorial and House fundraising mechanisms. What say you about the DNC at this point? Is this something that is another hurdle yet for the party, or do you think there's a way for them to play a role?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the people misunderstand the DNC, especially in these moments where we're leaderless as a party, as an organization that is supposed to provide some sort of leadership. But like, Ken Martin isn't like developing the democratic strategy to like solve all of America's problems. He is an administrator of a huge financial network that helps Democrats win in 2026 and 2028. But the job of the DNC time, the path for the Democratic to figure that but to raise a bunch of money and make sure that the infrastructure for the party, once we figure out where we're going, that the infrastructure is going to have much to realize. So
The recording has stopped.
like David House, a friend of mine.
This meeting is being recorded.
Eber's referring to that language in the big bad bill about the courts, the issue of contempt of court. Do you think that's gonna, is that likely to get kicked out? Or what do you think about the pact vis-a-vis the parliamentarian? I think the parliamentarians are going to be overruled in the Senate a number of times during these discussions. Any thoughts on that, other?
Yeah, I'm not in the weeds of that particular amendment and the legal implications. I agree that a lot of things in this bill that are not germane to the reconciliation process, and that Republicans will probably vote to overrule the parliamentarian. Yeah, but I don't know much about the contempt of court provision and its chances of passing the Senate.
Okay. Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on the Bernie AOC tour and how that might affect the 2026 election?
The Bernie AOC, you mean they're being out on the road and, are out there speaking and generating enthusiasm, apparently. Helpful? Will it continue, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to get people fired up and at least show people that parts of the Democratic Party have some fight and can, bring 3 or 5 or 8,000 people together in this moment. I don't think we have other leaders besides maybe Barack Obama who can really do that right now. So I think it's helpful. It's June of 2025. I think by this time next year, no one will remember the oligarchy tour as it was branded, and honestly, by October of 2026, no one will remember what was happening in June of 2026. Our political memory is very short.
Right.
So I don't think it really has any bearing on the 2026 election, but it's certainly, a statement that Bernie and AOC and the left wing of the party are making in terms of like what direction they think we need to be going. And, I think that the tour was sort of clearly a great success from a.
Sarah, any questions online? No questions online. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
How important is the federal debt level, or will it take a crisis to take some action on reducing the debt?
So the question is about the federal debt level. Is this an issue that you think is meaningful, or are we just going to go along our merry way and continue to kick the can down the road, as it were?
I think it's clearly meaningful. It's that our interest payments on the debt are our second largest expenditure in the entire federal budget, and including larger than the entire defense budget. I don't think that the Republican bill, for all of their accounting tricks, is going to do anything to reduce the deficit. In fact, it will do the opposite and exacerbate the deficit instead. The political salience of the debt, I think, is like a really hard thing to build a national coalition around, because it's pretty amorphous and not tangible to most people's lives. I don't think the argument that like austerity for the need to bring down the debt is a winning one politically. But that doesn't mean we're not walking off a financial cliff. So I don't have a good solution to that problem. I just don't see the like political incentives for the kind of serious debt deficit reduction that we need to do to address that problem being something that is, politically viable for either party to really take on right now.
So do you see your company, you've got obviously some clients now. Do you see you're building up an additional group of clients as you look at the 26 election? How's the market, I guess?
Yeah, we're pretty staffed up. We just got a 50-person team now, so it's all going very well. Yeah, we've got like 10 statewide races, so U.S. Senate and gubernatorial all across the country, and we'll probably add one or two more, but we're pretty close to wrapped up in terms of what we're working on for this cycle.
Well, I think we ought to give Chas a round of applause. We thank you very much. I know that in your efforts, you're out there every day, and it's not easy, I'm sure, to be the quote-unquote voice of the Democratic Party in different states and in different places with a single message. Hopefully, over time, the party will find its footing. This is not the first time. I think back to '92, when after the Reagan-Bush era, when a guy from Arkansas came out of nowhere, and we can think back even before then to other situations. So I love you, and we thank you for your time today. I hope you've got some time to take a break. How's the new office? Looks good.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing it, it's good.
Good. Thanks again. Well, what can I say? Chas just turned 25 a week ago. He started when he was 17, working for Jamie Raskin in the House as an intern. He wound up running the intern program a couple of years later. He graduated Georgetown in the School of Foreign Service. And when he joined this consulting firm, which I think the name has been changed recently to Lift Off Campaigns, there were 4 people. So he just said, I think there are now 50. So they're working hard. They've run some winning campaigns. They've run some campaigns that they didn't win. I suspect that's going to continue. In any event, I thought that would be a good introduction to our topic today, which is politics and basically the 2026 election. So let's take a break here for 10 minutes and we'll come back and we'll talk about some other issues, some of which you've raised already, and what the road out there really looks like going forward. Thanks. There it is. So, I know you'd all much rather listen to my grandson than to me, but so as I'm thinking, before we get to this, I don't know whether you know, airplanes, transportation, flying has become much in the news these days. And I saw two bits of news that I thought were amusing, related to flying. And those of you, when I remember when I started working 100 years ago, I was on an airplane every week and flew literally millions of miles. And it used to be wonderful getting on an airplane. You wore a suit and a tie, you got all dressed up, you got wonderful food and great service. I mean, today, it's like going on a bus. And I don't mean the Dartmouth coach. I mean those old Greyhound buses, if you remember those. In any case, the first story is an international story of a British Airways flight coming across the ocean, and they were serving the meal. And the stewardesses looked around, and there was one of the staff missing. They couldn't find him. So they went on a search of the plane, and one of the staff opened the door to a restroom in business class, where one of the stewards was entirely naked, dancing in front of a mirror. So they rounded up some of the rest of the staff. They put a bathrobe from an extra bathrobe they had from first class. They sat him in a seat. They belted him up. And when the plane landed, he was sent to a hospital for observation. Well, I think probably he was obviously on something. I don't know what, but anyway, you never know what's going to happen on an airplane. The second story was a domestic flight. And as the plane was closing up, somebody, a passenger, spotted a pigeon walking down the aisle of the plane. She let out a shriek. There was much commotion. The pilot came on and said that they had, quote unquote, a wildlife problem. And they managed to capture the pigeon. They went back to the gate and reloaded, went out on the runway. They were getting ready to take off when another pigeon flew down the length of the entire plane. Well, this put everybody into chaos, as you can well imagine. So they did manage to capture the second pigeon, and they were only an hour and a half late, which I guess is a good thing. But you do take your life in your hands today when you're getting on an airplane one way or another. So I sent you this. I'm not sure how well you can read it from the back, but I think this is a very interesting chart. I actually this is not a chart that I found anywhere. I counted, which doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I put this together when I was looking at this issue, and basically it's designed to show that there are significant population changes in this country that have been going on and continue to go on that affect significantly our representation in Congress. That's what this is all about. And so this is, when I say 60s, that's the 1960s. This is the 90s. This is today. And this is an estimate for the 30s based on an estimate of the census, which in turn is based on what has happened in the first 5 years between 20 and 25. So if things continue this way, this is roughly what the congressional seats by region will look like. Now, I think this is pretty shocking. Here in the 60s, we were sitting fat and happy in the Northeast, New England, New York, et cetera, with 117 congressional seats. And we're going to be now down to 81 seats. Bye. See ya. We don't care what you say, what you think, what you do. Finished. Absolutely. Deadsville. On the other hand, back here in the 60s, the good old boys had 124 seats, and it's looking like they're going to have 164 seats. That actually includes, you know, Florida and Texas, North and South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, and of course our very good friends in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. So what does this, and in the Midwest, they have a similar problem. They have a 30% decline going down to 88 states. And in the West, the mountain states have very few people, but they still have enough to double their participation in Congress. And the far West actually will probably lose a few seats for the first time. There are people leaving California. I think, and of course, the Senate doesn't change at all, because we have 2 representatives from every state, whether they have 12 people or 40 million people. Doesn't make any difference. So this is a reality that this country is facing. Yes?
What is your point here? Are you saying that there are going to be more Republicans because they live in the South?
Well, I didn't say that, but I didn't say that, but I think what we have seen is there is a distinct relationship between where you live and where you vote. And that relationship has changed over a period of time. That's true. We can remember back before the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, when people we call Republicans today were Democrats, and vice versa. So we know that there have been things that have changed you know, it's not a one-to-one. I'm not suggesting here that everyone in the South is a Republican. That's not true. But what we have seen is that in the southern states, if you look at a map of, let's say, the governors and the elected senators, you will see a heavy concentration of Republicans coming from the South. And similarly, you will see a heavy concentration of Democrats in the Northeast. In New England, for example, Collins is the only representative in Congress from New England, Republican representative. The others, House and Senate, are all Democrats. It doesn't mean it's going to always be that way, but it has been. So my point is that if these numbers are accurate, and there's no reason to believe in the next 5 years that these trends aren't going to remain the same. I mean, people are leaving these regions and going to these other regions for whatever reasons, a lot of maybe very good reasons. You know, it's in many places in the South, it's cheaper than it is in the Northeast. Now, it may not be cheaper than it is in some parts of the Midwest, but it's warmer than it is in some parts or most parts of the Midwest. So I think my point is, if you were looking at partisan politics, and I think we have to at least look at partisan politics, because that's the reality of what this is all about. That's the reality of the first 130 days of this administration, which has been kicking us in the fanny 24 hours a day. And they're going to continue to do that for the next 3+ years. I mean, we're getting killed out there. I'm not even a registered Democrat, but we are getting killed out there. And I suggest to you that that is likely to continue on a kind of a global basis, global countrywide basis, unless and until the Democrats are able to find ways to respond to what is going on and what has gone on. Now, Chas indicated, you know, they've got X number of clients, they're working with Y number of people, they're not the only firm in the country that does this work. There are a lot of people who do this work. He talked about 26. I think it is fair to say that the Senate seats, this is a very tough map. I'm going to try and show you another chart or two, but I wanted to kind of get this up to make this congressional point, because I think this says a lot in, this is one of those things where a picture says 1,000 words. And yes, Ross.
I think what you were saying is certainly true, but it's also made worse by the extreme partisanship from state to state that we have now. It's not true in each and every state. There are some states that we struggle to predict, but by and large, it's easy.
And well, I think your point is a good one. What we see is, in the results particularly of presidential elections, is this thing where I think there are 25 states that voted for Trump in all 3 elections. Well, I mean, you know, that's 50 senators to start with. Now, it doesn't mean that every one of those states has elected 2 Republican senators, but a lot of them have. So there is this thread or connection, I think, between these 2 things. Let me, Sarah.
Got an online question or a comment. The PDF you sent shows demographic shifts from traditionally liberal or moderate regions to more conservative regions. Are the migrants taking their political views with them?
So, I mean, I think I don't know the answer to that. We did see in this last presidential election that Trump made some gains in the black community, mostly with male voters, actually almost entirely with young male voters. And we did see that he made some gains in the Hispanic community as well. Now, they weren't huge gains, but in some of these states, you don't need huge gains. Certainly in many of these races, both these are House races, how many of these races, another change is that in these 435 races, there are something like 22 or 23 races. That's what, 5%, maybe less, that are actually up for grabs. The others are, you might as well not have a race, because the district is so either, not, it may be gerrymandered, it may not, but the district is overwhelmingly red or blue, and has been for some time. So if there are only 22 or 23 districts that are available to shift, which are scattered all over the country, let me see if I can pull a chart up that will make that point here. So there's a swath of red. These are congressional districts. And I could perhaps pull that down just a little. We don't see us here. Damn. Let me see. Okay, so we're here, 2 districts. This is Maine, of course, Hawaii and Alaska. But, I mean, you don't have to be a genius to look at a map like this and say, wow. I mean, doesn't that say wow to you? I mean, it looks like it's pretty hard to find a blue spot anywhere between, you know, I mean, anywhere except at the edges, as it were. Now, yes, there are a couple, around Chicago, and there's New Mexico, and the south of Nevada, and a little bit in Colorado. And then, strangely enough, there are a few down here in the south. But, now, the districts, of course, are not equally sized. They're supposed to be sized by population, but they're not. Congress gave that up a long time ago. And they're certainly not sized by geography, because we know that there are, I think somewhere between 6 and 9, there are 3 Democratic congressmen who have died in the last 6 or 9 months. So I think it's now 9, the disparity, the difference between the majority and the minority, I think, is now 9 people. But, if you look at this and you were to say to somebody who didn't know, there's a red team and a blue team, which team do you want to be on? What's the answer? It seems to me that this kind of hits you in the face. Yes, Dad?
But what about the independents? There's got to be an influence there. For example, the drift southward, the huge growth in Charlotte, North Carolina, 38% of the people there are independent.
Yeah.
And only 19% are Republicans. It doesn't show on that map, but it's an area where the concentration is exponentially growing. Hewlett-Packard moves 8,000 jobs into that area within the last 6 months.
So, I think that's an excellent point. This does not show independence, but what it does show, and I don't know when this was of, but it's probably at least 6 months old, but what it does show is that the independents are subsumed in these numbers. By that I mean that we don't know from looking at this how many independents or how they are split in any one of these districts. But what we do know is that the voting results are these, no matter who's in the district. So let's take Charlotte or North Carolina, which happens to be a state that is one of the most highly split of any state in the country. They just elected a Democratic governor, Josh Stein, and I believe a Democratic Attorney General, if I'm not mistaken. But the House and the Senate in North Carolina are heavily Republican. So, I think, what is it? It's roughly at least 1/3 of the people in the country are probably registered independents, roughly 1/3. It may be a few percentage points more. But
what about the pale green?
the what?
The pale green.
These? So these are districts that are up for grabs. That's what they are. They're districts that are neither definite Republicans or definite Democrats. Swing, thank you. Swing districts. I appreciate that. Yeah, Ross.
My thought is, it's an incredible chart that you're showing. There are a few places it's a little bit misleading because there are some states that are much closer than you would guess when looking at that chart. For instance, Pennsylvania is pretty close between Republican and Democrat. And of course, you're showing it as heavily red. Of course it is. on that chart. But I'm just pointing out, it's not quite as bad as I would guess by a first glance at the chart.
Okay? So, again, Martha?
Well, it's also urban versus rural, and I would expect that the population shifts have to do with southern and midwestern cities growing, so that the debate there used to be about electoral votes, you know, that should a highly populous city have the same number of electoral votes as a rural state, you lose some of that debate as the southern cities grow, right? I mean, eventually the population shift will affect electoral votes. The blue districts lose.
Well, I mean, historically, again, I think these blue dots represent mostly more densely occupied areas. Historically, those areas which are mainly cities, right? In Texas, it would be Houston or Dallas or San Antonio, for example. I mean, yes, that's, I think, you know, in general, we would see a rural-urban divide. And I don't think that's changed a lot.
Texas got 2 additional electoral votes in the last.
They did, and they're going to get more.
And California and other states lost them.
That's right. New York and California
So
lost.
it's not just in the congressional races, it's the electoral presidential race that's also eventually affected by that population.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. Yes,
Yeah, one of the things that's
Gene?
fascinating to me is what, if you go back to the Powell memorandum, and what he talked about there was focus on the state houses and focus on the state legislatures, and you'll build your national party.
So-
That is exactly what they did.
so to that point,
Right.
there are roughly 3,200 state legislators in the United States, and 2,600 to 2,700 are Republicans. And you can see immediately why, right?
Yes.
Immediately. Forget the gerrymandering, which is going on anyway. You know, somebody mentioned North Carolina. There was an election in North Carolina in November for a Supreme Court seat in North Carolina. And after that election, a Democrat they called the race for Democrats, and there were a series of lawsuits that followed. And it was just last week that the Republican Party finally conceded the election to the Democrat. And the next day, the Department of Justice, is that what they call it now? Filed a lawsuit in North Carolina in the federal courts to overturn the election on the same basis that the state courts had finally agreed to the election, quote unquote, of this. This is for a Supreme Court justice in a state. This is a never-ending cycle. We have found ourselves in a situation where basically, if you don't agree, you just keep suing and hope that somebody up there will love me. right? As Roy Cohn used to say, it doesn't make any difference who your lawyers are. Just tell me who's the judge. Speaking of that, I also saw this week my old friend Alan Dershowitz. Boy, you just can't get rid of him somehow. So he taught at Harvard Law School for 50 years, 5-0. Made a fortune on a bunch of criminal and other related cases because they allowed him to go out and not only was he teaching, but he was, practicing law, etc. And I was shocked to see that he came out and said, I agree with the Trump administration, there is anti-Semitism at Harvard. This is from Alan Dershowitz, who's been there for 50 years, who, as best I know, never, ever raised his hand about anti-Semitism at Harvard. Not ever, not once, as best I know. So he's the same guy who stood in the well of the House with Trump's first
Impeachment.
Thank you for the word. For Trump's first impeachment as an attorney for Trump, and said, quote, I am not here to defend the president. I'm here to defend the Constitution. What a lot of crap that is. And then he went on to say, and I'm going to donate my fee, which of course he never discussed in terms of how much it was, to charity. Did you ever see that check? Are you with an organization who received that check? I don't think that check was ever shown to anybody that I know or see. And so, anyway, I was amused, bemused, I guess, is a better word by that. So, any further? I think this says a lot. And yes, Carol.
What about the electoral college versus one person, one vote?
Well, that's another whole discussion.
Right.
And I'm going to talk toward the end of this class about perhaps some larger issues, and maybe that's one that's kind of included in that. I think I tried to organize this course, as I explained to you, or tried to explain in the first class, that we would have the introduction and talk about a history of the first 100 days. Then we'd have a discussion about domestic issues, foreign issues, the court, and today's class on the politics of it all. And next week, of course, we'll round it up and have a perfect set of answers for what we're all going to do when it's over, and where we're going to meet for the celebration. And the biggest question is going to be, who's going to pay for the drinks, right? So, so I think what this and related issues tell us is that there's better than a 50% chance that the Democrats will win the House. But, and I have some, historically, the party out of power does come back and win the House. That's been true for many years. Since 1946, there have been 20 midterms, and in 18 of them, the president's party has lost seats. That's a pretty good percentage, right? 90%. Only twice did the president not lose. That was in '88 and in 2002. So there is a good chance that the Democrats will come back. Will they have a sweep? The answer is there are no sweeps here. The days of sweeps are over. The country is too closely divided. Sweeps are no more. In the Senate, there's less pronounced change because of the way it's set up. In the Senate, in the last 20 midterms, the presidential party has either had a draw or has netted seats 7 times out of 20. Basically 1 out of 3. So those odds are much better. Yes, ma'am.
I think that you suggested 2 things this morning. One is that it's the margin. It's not the majority, but it's the 5% that can swing either way. And that local elections may be the place to have the most impetus, because as new people vote, I'm from Florida, and I know that in the local elections, they consider it a big turnout when 12 or 15% of the population votes.
Yep.
So we are basically like the minority, the countries where the minorities who have 2 or 3 seats in our legislature can move, are powerful.
So I think that is an important point. And I thank you for making it that way. And I would also say, to follow that up, here in New Hampshire, well, we're not in New Hampshire, but we are, most of us at least, or some of us are from New Hampshire, because Vermont is a totally other ball game. But in New Hampshire, we have a situation where we have had we've had federal representation in the House and in the Senate from Democrats for some time. But in the state, we have a significant majority in both the House and Senate in the Republican Party, and as well in the Executive Council, where it's, I think, still 4-1, if I'm not mistaken. So New Hampshire is a good example of that point, because what we now have is a group of libertarians who moved in from, or began moving in, 20 or 25 years ago from Oregon, quote unquote, to take over the state. They haven't taken over the state, but they hold a significant bulk of votes in the House and in the Senate. And basically, without their support, it's very hard for anybody to get anything done. So one of the things they got smart about was they originally started running as libertarians, and they didn't get any votes. Now they run as Republicans, and they get a lot more votes.
Are they free staters?
Yeah, free staters, yes. So I think, so we have had, John Lynch was governor for a number of terms. But we continue, because we only have basically one statewide elected officer, namely the governor. We have no lieutenant governor. Ralph, you should become lieutenant governor, I think. The attorney general is appointed. You know, I mean, everybody else is appointed. So I think finding a way for Democrats to win in New Hampshire is a challenge. I think the area around Hanover and Lebanon is an area in general that's, you know, relatively Democratic when you take the independents along with the. But if you look around the rest, I don't have a map of New Hampshire here, but as we would look at a map, we would see in the rural areas and probably in some others as well, we would see why that continues to be the case. We have a chair of the Democratic State Committee who, in my opinion, should be kicked out, completely ineffective, absolutely worthless as a Democratic chair. But I am told that the state county chairs do not even know how much he is paid. I mean, this is in today's world, and yet they haven't been able to move him out of that seat. So, to your point, state politics means a tremendous amount. The Republicans have been working on this for 40 or 50 years, and we are at a loss, really, to combat, have been at a loss to combat it. So let me continue here. Now, the Senate, of course, is another beast entirely, and we've made that point. The Senate, as you know, is two people from every state, regardless of size of state or size of population. And it is now 53 to 47 if you include Bernie and Angus King. They're not officially Democrats, but they caucus with the Democrats. I had a classmate at law school, Jim Jeffords, who became a senator from Vermont, a Republican initially, and he switched over, you may recall, back some years ago, and caused great consternation in the Senate because his vote was pivotal. I think at that time that the Senate was actually tied, if I'm not mistaken. So the move of one person can make a huge difference. So there are, I think, 35 Senate seats that are up in 2026. And again here, you have, well, we heard Chas say that the Ossoff race is going to be the most expensive in the history of the United States. I don't doubt that. Over 150 million. And most of it is not coming from Georgia. I mean, that's the thing that's so amazing about our system. I mean, how many of you can remember McCain-Feingold? Remember that bill? That wasn't all that long ago. We had a bill where, you know, that had been passed by Congress where, you know, you couldn't make these kinds of contributions. And then, of course, we had Citizens United, and here we are with billionaires running up and down the countryside, having a good time at our expense, and about to get not only a continuation of a tax cut that they've had since the first Trump administration, but a provision that says these tax cuts will be permanent. So then we have the open seat here in New Hampshire. We have Susan Collins' race in Maine. We have Tom Tillis in North Carolina. We've tried to beat him before and have come close. But this is a situation, it really doesn't look like we could do better than winning a couple of seats, which frankly, you know, is like kissing your sister. It doesn't help. Yes, Russ.
I've been staring at your maps probably more than I should here, but I'm glad you got this one on the screen now. I stared too long at the last one, and I kept thinking there was something wrong with it. I understand you're showing House and Senate. I know what you're doing in the maps, but I kept feeling it doesn't show the country accurately. And this one I think does. This is a good map that you have up there now. And it really shows a pretty equally divided country, which is what we are, I think. The last one looked overwhelmingly Republican, and I think that's, I really think this one's more accurate.
So we talked about, let me kind of begin to wind down here a little. Let's push this out just a bit. And I know that 2026 is still a long way away, the election, 17 months or something like that. But let's talk for a minute about 2028. That's really a long way away. And, you know, I mean, polls now that we see are, of course, completely meaningless. But when you see them, you look at them, right? I mean, and the last poll I saw for the Democratic nomination for president in 2028 showed Harris at about 13 or 14%, AOC at 10%, and Pete Buttigieg at 8 or 9%. Well, I don't put much stock in those polls, but, you know, that's where they were. But I want to make a point here because I think it's instructive. Remember a guy called Tricky Dick? So I want to just go back and review for you a history, brief history of his career. So he was elected to the House in 1946. He served 2 terms, and then he ran for the Senate against a lady whose name was Helen Gahagan Douglas. She was married to Melvin Douglas, very well-known actor, stage and screen actor, and she had been active in politics. And he said early in that campaign, quote, there's going to be no smears, no disparaging, you know, this is going to be a clean campaign. And the first thing he did was to print up on pink paper a whole series of accusations basically saying that Helen Douglas was a communist. You'll recall this was in the 50s. It was just really prior to Joe McCarthy. But communists were not on everybody's hit list. In any event, you'll remember that Nixon got elected to the Senate. He won by a considerable margin. He was there only 2 years before Ike picked him as his vice president. And served 8 years. You remember the Chequers speech. Oh, that reminds me of something else because I'm thinking of Eisenhower. Eisenhower had a staff aide, I think he was secretary to the cabinet, whose name was Sherman Adams, who came from New Hampshire. And Sherman Adams accepted a gift. Does anybody remember what it was and from whom? It was a vicuna coat from a guy whose name was Bernie Goldfine, who lived in Boston. A vicuna coat that probably in those days cost maybe $400, probably not. And Adams had to resign. He had to resign because he accepted that coat. Think about what is happening today in the White House. These guys don't even know what a vicuna coat is. Anyway, Nixon ran in 1960. He lost that election by a very close margin, one of the closest margins in history. To his credit, he did not contest it. He felt that it would not be a good precedent to set, and he went back to California. Remember what he did? He ran for governor in 1962. Remember what happened to him? He lost to a portly gentleman whose name was Pat Brown. And everybody said Dick Nixon was finished. And then in '64, the Republicans nominated Goldwater. Nixon was nowhere to be seen. And then in '68, he came back. And he won by a hair over the happy warrior, Hubert Horatio Humphrey. That was the election where the votes in Illinois from downstate came in late. No one was ever really sure. There were also votes in Texas that were highly controversial, where LBJ, of course, was from. In any event, Nixon won in '68, and in '72, he got 520 electoral votes. A huge landslide. And in '74, goodbye. See ya. So, life in politics can be very short. And I just kind of repeat that story, not to compare Kamala Harris to Richard Nixon in any way, shape, or form, but just to say that surprises can happen. And I think it's worth remembering. So I thought I'd kind of wind up today by talking briefly about this book, No Democracy Lasts Forever. A book by Erwin Chemerinsky, who is the dean of the law school at in California at UCLA. And Chemerinsky is a very interesting guy. He wrote this book a year ago, and you can get it anywhere, I'm sure. It's not expensive. I think it's a book that's interesting enough to read, and I'm not supporting or suggesting that what he says is worth I want to take that back. I'm not suggesting that this is either a program that should be supported or shouldn't be supported, but I think it's very interesting. Basically, what he says is that when we put together the Constitution, we gave away the store. And I have long thought that the Constitution, as a venerated document in our society, was way overrated. We made so many serious errors that, in some sense, it's laughable, but unfortunately, it's not funny. And it has come back to bite us, you know where, many, many times, and will continue to do so. So basically what he suggests is a number of things. He suggests that there are changes that need to be made, either through a constitutional convention or through amendment. And then, of course, he goes on to say that trying to get a constitutional convention, or passing amendments is virtually impossible. You know, since the first 10 amendments, we've passed 17 amendments, 2 of which were related to prohibition, so the amendment process is not easy. He goes on to talk about life tenure for the justices, the requirement for renewing the Voting Rights Act and campaign financing laws. We know those things are absolutely gone. We're not going to see those again, at least in the foreseeable future. He talks about expanding the size of the House, and he talks about originalism. At the end of the book, he talks about secession. And he's not recommending this, but he does talk a little bit about whether that might make some sense. So I guess the question I would ask is, are we there? And, you know, we'll talk about this next week. I don't know if we're there, but if we're not there, we're damn close to being there. We got 1 foot in the box. And I am concerned for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and I believe that what we are witnessing on a day-to-day basis from what's going on in Washington is truly disastrous. And as I say, in my opinion, this is going to continue for the next 3 years at least, no matter what happens in the election in the House in 26. I agree with Chas. I think the Senate will pass this bill. There's no way the Republicans aren't going to vote for tax cuts. That's the bottom line. And they'll do anything to get them. I think Hawley and Ron Johnson are not to be trusted. I think in the end they'll vote for that bill. That'll mean that there are only 2 or 3 senators who might not vote for it. And JV is always there waiting to cast that tie vote ballot. So I think that's what we're going to see. So I appreciate your patience and interest. I look forward to next week, and I hope we can enjoy some more beautiful weather in the interim. Thank you very much.